So without further ado, I will let Lucy start with the first introduction session on result-based payments.
Thank you, Florian. Going to jump in very quickly because I know that we have got a lot to come in with this session to try and understand what are results-based finance. They're not a new concept, and it's generally used as an umbrella term that refers to a wide range of programs and interventions that provide rewards or payments to both individuals or communities and institutions based on their achievement of predefined and agreed upon results that are then verified, often by a third party. Results-based payments can also refer to an international agreement, such as a donor country, a multilateral organization and recipient country, or they might be within a domestic agreement, for example, government-sponsored PES. The benefits of a mechanism, results-based payments, they can provide landscape actor aligned incentives to implement activities such as restoration and climate action, as well as maintaining biodiversity. They can also be tailored very much specifically to the local context, which can crowd in actors, landscape actors, to implement activities very specific to local level outcomes. So this can foster autonomy at local level and also innovation and an ability for these projects to adapt to changing circumstances. Results-based payments can also provide a value to protected and or restored ecosystem services or landscapes, or even the activity itself to support this adaptive management. And it can also increase the cost effectiveness of programs and initiatives and improve their accountability. If payments are made only on results achieved, there's a greater link between financing directly to desired outcomes rather than specific inputs or outputs, which may be ineffectual or ill-suited to local contexts. So this can lower investment risk, and the investors may therefore be more certain that their contributions and finance are having a real impact on the ground, in particular if these payments are verified through third parties. Examples of results-based payments beyond carbon as well include payments for ecosystem services, where compensatory payments or cash or in-kind materials are paid by downstream users to upstream ecosystem service providers for a provision of an ecosystem service.
Les serveurs et les crédits de carbone et les différents systèmes de paiement. Pourquoi est-ce qu'ils sont nécessaires? Donc, la dégradation des forêts, c'est plus de 2 milliards.
Food, water and energy security of nearly 3.2 billion people. Restoration of these landscapes in terms of their ecological functionality and also their sustainable productivity requires significant investment and effort by those on the ground. So incentives can therefore help support governments, but also local landscape actors take action. These may be financial or non-financial to support, for example, tree plantation on degraded land, or improving the sustainability of production practices, developing alternative livelihoods and sustainable value chains, improving energy efficiency and enabling access to clean energy to support restored and sustainable landscapes at scale. So how do these link with climate finance to restoration? Well, forests are a core nature-based solution, and they're critical to addressing the climate emergency. So if deforestation is stopped and degraded forests are restored, they can provide around a third of the carbon reduction needed to avoid even those severe impacts of climate change. So carbon financing is an innovative financing tool that can place a value on carbon emissions. It can also allow companies wishing to offset their own emissions to buy carbon credits earned from sustainable restoration and conservation initiatives on the ground. Results-based payments for climate finance specifically links these payments to achieving climate-related results, in particular with a focus on carbon and other greenhouse gas emissions. Payments can therefore be made to reduce or cease emission-causing activities such as deforestation, land degradation. And by linking these financial rewards to climate objectives, these results-based finance enable an innovative financing arrangements that can accelerate funding, in particular coming from the private sector and corporations. Contracts can go beyond local level and enable emissions reductions to be purchased to offset carbon emissions elsewhere at a global level. So this aims to make it much easier and more cost effective for organisations to pursue this. But they also must be verified by a third party. And the other panelists will share more examples of those third parties and different sorts of verification. From a restoration and forest and landscape restoration point of view, there is significant potential for these activities to mitigate and adapt climate change with targeted restoration of high carbon potential landscapes. And different restoration activities through FLR, they can enable varying climate change mitigation and adaptation benefits. This may be dependent on landscapes by physical characteristics, the local climate, the species used in restoration, management practices, and the overall restoration approach, which will impact how and the extent to which climate-based finance can provide these financial incentives. And this is figure here is an example of how annual carbon dioxide removal rates have been found to be highest in restored planted forests and woodlots, followed by mangrove restoration, natural regeneration, and agroforestry. So that gives you an example of how results-based finance, when it's really targeted specific to certain restoration approaches, can have the potential to really leverage incentives at local level to implement these activities for both climate action and restoration outcomes on the ground. Activities that qualify for carbon finance from a restoration perspective. I know Marina will be talking more in depth about these later on. There are a number of different restoration activities that qualify or can fit criteria for carbon finance from results-based payments. These include forest conservation, so that's a focus on the preservation of forests, peatlands, and mangrove resources. Restoration, which focuses on practices such as assisted natural regeneration, planted forests and woodlots, development of agroforestry, and silvopasture. And then sustainable practices to support improved production that effectively balances the social, economic, and ecological objectives of that landscape. And also improved forest management. So this is looking at activities that result in increased carbon stocks, either within forests and or reduce greenhouse gas emissions when compared to business as usual scenarios. But Marina will go in more detail with that. So when talking about carbon finance and results-based finance, there's a lot of jargon involved. And acronyms and phrases. So we hope to help you out with this masterclass with clarifying these with a quick recap. So when looking at results-based payments, they can also be known as performance-based aid or performance-based contracts or conditional transfers. They provide funding conditional on actions undertaken by target beneficiaries, which can sometimes be verified by a third party. Payments for ecosystem services. These are voluntary compensatory payments to landowners to implement agreed actions that increase the provision of an increase of ecosystem services. RED Plus, which Lucia will be talking about next, is a program called Reducing Emissions from Deforestation and Forest Degradation. This is an incentive mechanism for developing countries to protect and better manage their forests, reducing greenhouse gas emissions and also providing climate benefits. An offset. So what is an offset? It's the reduction or removal of carbon dioxide or other greenhouse gas emissions to compensate for emissions elsewhere. They may be removal offsets, which are generated from activities that take carbon out of the atmosphere, such as tree planting, regenerative agriculture. Or they might be avoidance offsets. These are generated from activities that reduce emissions by preventing their release into the atmosphere. A carbon credit, this is a permit that allows the trading of carbon or other greenhouse gas offsets. And for carbon, this is measured in metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, with one carbon credit corresponding to 1 metric ton prevented from entering the atmosphere through these projects for restoring and reforesting lands to create a carbon sink. And it's a tradable certificate that's traded on the carbon market, which is the trading system in which carbon credits are bought and sold, which I know that Marina will discuss in more detail a bit later on in the masterclass.